namaste everyone. Welcome to the first episode of Green Hour with GreenMan, presented to you all by Eco Network. My name is Saurabh Pakurel and I'm the regional ambassador of Eco Network in Nepal. So welcome everyone, and now I would like to introduce our speaker, Mr. GreenMan Matthias. He is also the advisor for our Eco Network team, and more to introduce him. He is a man who connects the word, green revolution, because he has lots of experience, and his insights, his inspiring talks, we'll be having today. Likewise, he also started Eco Warriors, which was a community movement focused on taking positive action for climate change. Apart from that, he has also been felicitated with different titles like, Greenest Person on Planet 208. So I also want to get that title someday, hopefully. So, and also he has also been felicitated with Green Icon of the Year Award, Asia Pacific CSR Asia. So welcome, GreenMan, on the Green Hour Talk.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Saru. Nice to see you again, and hi to everybody out there. I hope you enjoyed the last session that we had. I think it was quite lively and quite interesting. I got some nice feedback, so hopefully we can give you some more good insights into green opportunities, green jobs, green business, and how we can make money from healing the planet rather than from destroying it, and how you can be part of it within your country, within the worldwide flat internet platform, within the global opportunities that are there.
Today, as the first episode of Green Hour with GreenMan, we had kept this FAQ session so that we can address all those questions that were unanswered last time. We have noted it down. We'll be talking about those questions, and to add up, we'll also be taking questions today as well. So feel free to interact with us with your questions, put it in the comment box, and also don't forget to share this video, because environment matters to all, and we need to talk about sustainability because we are the one who are responsible to protect our nature and protect our Mother Earth. So with that note, I think I should start the question. Sir GreenMan, are you ready? Ready for taking the questions?
Sure.
I'll start with the first very common questions. Like whenever we talk about green business, when we're talking about environment business, so the thing that we need is capital. So there was one question last time. So it was about what new eco-friendly product-based business can we start? So hello, Greg, sir. How are you?
Good.
I feel blessed because I'm with the two very inspiring personalities out here. I'm very blessed. So to all our viewers, I would like to introduce Mr. Greg to you all. So he has been a global advocate for excellence in performance management and sustainable development. And he will be talking about environmental business in a wider perspectives, because as you can see, he has lots of experience. So looking forward to hear from you, Mr. Greg. So now I'd like to move on to the first question. So I think you both are ready, right, to take the questions? So I was talking about business. So when we talk about business, there is always a topic capital. So there was a question, what new eco-friendly product-based business can we start with limited capital? So every youth has this concern, like how to start, what should be the first point to start, and what can we do with a limited capital, sir? So I'd like to flow this question to Mr. GreenMan. Yes.
Yes. I can't remember exactly whether I shared my business story last time, but I started a business with zero capital. And what can you do with zero capital? If you are working with your brain and you do consultancy or training, then you do not need to spend any capital to start such a business. It was a consulting and training business for environmental management. And nowadays you can deliver online training. You can deliver online consulting, even more cost effective, even more efficient, potentially globally available, globally present. You don't need to have capital for that. You can start it with zero capital. Only when you want to sell equipment, when you want to sell products, then you might need upfront capital to invest in them. But when you are selling your knowledge, when you're selling your skills, when you're selling your strategic advice or your training for how to make a business greener or how to help a listed company to do a sustainability report. I was searching the other day online for somebody that can give advice on environment, social governance, the latest trend with investing. Large corporations are doing those reports anywhere in the world if they are listed companies, because the financial investment community is investing in ESG funds. I couldn't find anybody that has that expertise that was low cost. Everybody that I could find was charging very, very high rates, like 30, 40, 50 US dollars per hour. So there is a huge market opportunity there for somebody with skills like that to actually start a business with zero money down. But if you have no experience in ESG reporting, then you're not an expert. Then you need to study and get some practical experience first. Maybe you offer yourself to be a volunteer for a local listed company for 2 or 3 months. I am a consultant for the Philippine Stock Exchange. The Philippine Stock Exchange is a listed company as well. We just sent out the flyer to look for interns. The payment is close to zero. Originally, it was supposed to be in the office, but then the COVID crisis came along, and then it became an online role. Now a French guy has gotten the job. Nobody else really applied for it. Maybe you couldn't make money with it, but to enter a new area and become an expert in a new area, you need experience. Sometimes you need to gather that experience without expecting to make big money from it. So you should always have a medium-term plan rather than a short-term plan. If somebody comes to me, claims to know the stuff, wants to charge a lot of money for an online service, then they need to be very good and very experienced. But, you can come to me and say, hey, I haven't got experience in this. I want to learn. Can I offer my skill at this point in time for free? Okay, no problem. Let's get your experience started. Then when you've got the experience, then you can charge higher fees.
Okay. So when we, like you just talked about, the capital is not a thing. You should have that interest. You should have that, working kind of interest so that you can make it happen. So when there was another question relevant to this, like from the profit perspective, like should entrepreneur focus on solving issues that have most potential to attract investors, or make good investment deal, or focus on what they are interested in? So how can we categorize this interest? Either you can be profit oriented, or you can rather focus on what you are interested and contribute from yourself. So that was the question. So what should an entrepreneur do in this green business?
Let me there's one thing that I would like to say about entrepreneurial spirit. Number one, one doesn't have to think of themselves as someone who's going to go out and solve the problem. As Matthias was explaining, the first thing you have to do is show experience, and to have experience, you have to have the opportunity to actually work, whether it's as he was saying, to get on with someone at a low cost and get some experience. But the connectivity of people, we've become a global, it's a global marketplace and has been for many decades. And today, the investments that are coming into community networks online that are trying to build community, provide connectivity, provide online resources for education are really crucial. I surprisingly, although he doesn't say it, I do get involved a lot in Facebook. I have about 2,000 friends in Facebook, and Facebook is just a very difficult community to extract solid knowledge from, unless they're private communities like this one. So one of the things that I would recommend is that you consider developing networks that bring community together. And there are many ways to do it and many communities that are evolving. Facebook, Instagram are becoming old, dated, and they're trying to provide more and more activities and more attractions to it, like Facebook Marketplace. And that's a place where you can sell services as well as products. So the idea of building a community requires very low capital. 2 or 3 people can get together and think through and develop a community online that could bring people together rather than the person saying, I have to be able to fix that myself. I have to be able to create the device myself. One benefit that you have that many people don't is education in the green community, where you understand all the different aspects of it. So begin to develop a community network. Matthias and I are both involved in a developmental aspect of a system that will provide a link between green product manufacturers and green product users, a place where the community can come together and have that exchange. I'm involved in 2 others that are doing a similar thing. It just requires working on the internet and developing an online program that will ultimately be of value to a group will be great. And it's at that time that you have to think differently about the business case, where you start thinking about advertising on the business case in a way to make money. But the critical issue would be provide a service that would accelerate green activities in a global marketplace. That's something that can be done without a lot of money and to get started. And once there's a network up and running, there are investors today that are very interested in that sort of activity.
Yeah, and this is a good point. Actually, investors don't really mind whether they put their money into a company from Bangladesh, from Nepal, or from India, or from the US. It must be a very solid business case. It must be a promising team and a great idea that really is in tune with what the marketplace needs. And a lot of this is a flat world opportunity of creating communities like Greg was mentioning. But coming back to your original question with regards to should the focus be on providing solutions that by solving problems that the market is looking for, and then usually people pay you, or follow your skill and your passion. The solution depends on you, on the field that you're analyzing, and most likely the solution is somewhere in the middle. It should be a combination of what you're skillful in, what you're passionate about, because that is the most important thing. To really pull a business through, you need to have the commitment, the belief, the passion. That's why it's important that it's linked to your natural skill. I think I mentioned it in our first call as well, this Japanese concept of, the market is willing to pay for it. It's linked with your passion, your natural skill, and it's linked to what is trending. And if it's trending, then you can ride the wave with the marketplace. And if you have a niche expertise, then somebody that looks for a specific area like ESG, there might not be so many experts. That's why the prices per hour can be very high, because it's a small market. But if you are a real expert in that niche, then you can fetch a higher price. So combine the two with one another to get the best way forward.
Okay. So there was another query that was about carbon trading concept. So there was a question, can we take the carbon trading concept as a green business in real means in developing countries like Nepal or Bangladesh? So can you explain what this carbon trading concept is, and also can it be one of the prospect as green business in developing countries like us? So GreenMan, can you talk about the carbon concept, please?
Yes, it can be. Just to give you an example, my friend runs a carbon verification company in Sri Lanka. And he has sold some of the most expensive carbon credits to corporate buyers like Marks and Spencer. Marks and Spencer had some of their garments made climate neutral, and I think they paid them nearly $20 per ton of carbon credit. Why? Because this carbon credit was a combination of a project that was helping the local community to keep a forest alive, to plant more trees, and to plant additional crops that absorb carbon dioxide and create livelihood. If you look at carbon credit projects, especially on the UNFCCC website, the cheap ones are the large-scale projects like wind and solar, because people say there's very limited social benefit. The most expensive carbon credits are those that provide comprehensive environmental and social benefits, and they are usually in developing countries. So Bangladesh, Nepal, India could be perfect places to generate those carbon credits. Now, what are carbon credits? Basically, if I want to go climate neutral or I want to make a company climate neutral, I need to calculate my carbon footprint. My carbon footprint is everything that I am responsible for that emits CO2. This is the food that I eat. The more red meat you eat, the more unhealthy you live, and the more CO2 emissions you have for the planet. Our water consumption, the waste that we generate, the things that we consume, the fuel that we burn in our vehicles for transportation. If we use public transport, we have a lower carbon footprint, and in particularly as well, our electricity bill. Here in the Philippines, it's very hot and humid. We use some aircon here in the home. When I was a bachelor, I was mainly using the fan. Now with a family, young kids, you need aircon, but I bought an inverter aircon. The inverter aircon is more expensive, but it has less power consumption. So it helps me to reduce my electricity bill, and this means a lower carbon footprint. Every kilowatt hour of electricity that you consume and buy, you can convert that into a carbon footprint. Depending on where your power comes from, for example, in Malaysia, the grid factor is 750 grams of carbon dioxide per kilowatt hour of electricity. In the Philippines, it's about 600 grams. Why? Because the Philippines has more renewable power. They have a lot of geothermal power plants, which have a much lower carbon footprint than coal-fired power plants. So a carbon footprint is the accumulated calculation of your total environmental impact in CO2 equivalent. CO2 equivalent even includes other emissions. Let's say if you would have methane being generated, for example, if you have some cows, or when we calculate the carbon footprint from red meat, the methane that the cow generate has a much higher carbon footprint than the CO2. So we need to have a 1 kilogram of methane is about equivalent to, I think it's about 24 kilogram of carbon dioxide, CO2 equivalents in terms of its total carbon footprint. So we are bringing everything back to the unit CO2 equivalent. When we talk about business, we talk about US dollars, euro, or taka. And when we talk about carbon footprint in terms of its global warming impact, then we are talking about CO2 equivalent. So the carbon footprint is measuring the CO2 equivalent of your life, a process, a product, or a business. Then after measuring and calculating, you will try to reduce your carbon footprint. And then what you cannot reduce anymore, you might buy carbon credits to make it climate neutral. When I printed and bought and sold my book, I made my book climate neutral. I actually went even further. I bought carbon credits from a reforestation project in Panama. So again, my credits were from a developing country. It feels better when you buy the credits from a developing country, but then you need to rely on the voluntary market. You need to find the buyers. You cannot rely on your government because the governments in developing countries usually have not established a carbon tax or a carbon credit market. This is the voluntary market that you need to tap into.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that too, if I can. One of the challenges
Yes,
with
sir.
carbon trading, is that carbon trading is normally used when an organization or a government is already emitting too much carbon. And the carbon trading concept is that they will invest in another area, for example, and trade off. They won't be penalized for that. It was based on the Kyoto Protocol. So one of the challenges is for people to offset heavy pollution. And like Matthias was saying, the critical issue is they have to understand just how much carbon they emit through the entire life cycle, the value chain, the whole chain of events leading up to a product. They call it from cradle to grave. So when somebody like a car manufacturer, Volkswagen or Toyota, builds an automobile, they have many suppliers, and those suppliers have carbon footprints. So all have the opportunity to see how much carbon they put out. And then Toyota looks at it and says, what's the carbon footprint of this automobile? All the way through its life cycle until it's put away. And that's a very, very challenging calculation. And it has to be done in order to really make a difference in the world. And the challenge of some of the carbon trading is that people will try to avoid focusing on their company by investing in another place to bring back, to try to offset their environmental impact. So if they're too high on carbon, they'll invest in another place that's very high on carbon to try and lower it. So the net effect is that they have improved the environment. It's when they try to do that and then don't try to continue to improve their own environment, just invest outwardly. Coca-Cola did a dramatic change in 10 years with the amount of water that they consumed. They consumed 9 liters of water for every liter of product they produced. And they said in 10 years, we're going to be water neutral, which means they wouldn't consume in their whole life cycle, they would avoid consuming any water at all. That means they had to recycle all wastewater. They had to reuse water. They had to think of different ways of producing containers, how to clean the containers and so on. And they did. And in addition to that, they were getting carbon credits along the way. So that's what I mean by making sure both organizations, it's one of the challenges that they face today with carbon trading.
We dealt about carbon trading concepts. So there are different forms of pollution. And one question that was very common is how can we reduce this electronic waste, because this is a technological era and we are far more dependent on technology at any time in this history. So regarding that, how can we manage this electronic waste? So that was a question. So I would like to request GreenMan to answer that. Electronic waste.
Electronic waste is not just waste. There's actually a lot of value in the phones, in the computers. And if we can extract that value in an eco-friendly manner without polluting the environment, then it could potentially be a good recovery of especially the precious metals that are in there. The first priority for us as individuals should be, how can we extend the life of our electronic gadgets? The computer that I'm using now is already 5 years old. And one of the things that I've learned is never upgrade your operating system. I'm still using my old Windows 8. I'm sure if I would have upgraded to Windows 10, I would have struggled to be able to use my computer. because it would have slowed it down so much that it doesn't work efficiently anymore. So when you buy something with a long-term user perspective. When I bought this computer, I bought a pretty good spec, so it's still doing very well until today, even though it's 5 years old. So in the last 5 years, I have not contributed to any computer electronic waste. So we as users should challenge ourselves to not generate too much electronic waste. Then we should look at upcycling of electronic waste. There are a lot of companies here already that take old phones, old computers, refurbish them, reprocess them, put a slim operating system, maybe open source operating system in there, and then make them available to communities that don't have the funds to buy their own, make them available to developing countries' school projects. So there are many different ways of how we can recycle and potentially upcycle the electronic waste. The problem is when you have a lot of electronic waste coming to a country and it's being used as a dumping ground. I think Ghana became the place where a lot of the European electronic waste was shipped to, and then in very unsanitary conditions, with open burning, people tried to recover some of the precious metals in there. That is very problematic environmentally. I think Bangladesh and India are places where a lot of these tankers are being dismantled, and some of it, the metal is being recovered, but there's a lot of waste being generated. So we need to avoid that developing countries become the dumping ground of electronic waste or other waste from the Western societies. So we need to come up with good business models, and we need as well domestically in your countries effective legislation to prevent this. What happened in Malaysia last year after China closed its borders for plastic waste, a lot of Malaysian businessmen thought, oh, great opportunity. I can make a lot of money now with bringing in the plastic from Europe. I'm getting paid for it. And, I get a recycling license. Many of them never recycled. They just burned that plastic. And that contributed a lot to pollution. It contributed a lot to negative health impacts for the local community. So we need effective legislation to avoid that. Legislation in Europe, in the developing countries, but as well effective legislation at the receiving end, because it's usually a two-way process. So we need personal behavioral change, effective non-polluting solutions to deal with the electronic waste, and we should buy those solutions that last long, rather than those solutions that only last short term. I won't mention the brand here now, but when I realized one special computer, a very famous brand, I bought many years ago, I couldn't get second-hand things. I couldn't get cheap charger. I had to buy the original charger. Then a new version comes out. The charger changes again. I cannot reuse my old charger. It's all done to make us buy as many items as possible. I stopped buying that famous brand as a personal protest against that behavior of changing all the gadgets and the connections every time they come out with a new product. I do not support that. I do not want to be part of that. So I don't buy that brand anymore.
So we're talking about electronic waste. So there was another concept of, urban planning. Because this is also one, like the world is moving towards urbanization. The different, villages are converting into cities and towns. So this type of things happens in developing countries as well. So can you discuss the role of urban planners? So what should be the way urban planners should implement so that they can ensure a sustainable green environment? Because urbanization is itself a very very sensitive thing, and in that case, what should be the urban planner work on to ensure the environmental sustainability? So I would like to ask this to both of you. Yeah.
That's a great question, and a tough job for urban planners today. Very tough job. One of the, I think Matthias and I both mentioned earlier about the carbon footprint. A city is an enterprise. It's like a company, but it's they produce community, and in it they consume and they create waste. So this issue of measuring the carbon footprint of a city from the planning stage is one of the key elements of helping an urban planner helping a community develop a city that would be eco-friendly. And that's from the very basics. Understanding what type of consumable services they will have, what kind of, we just talked about recyclables, what kind of waste is generated, what will happen to the waste. For example, here in Florida, we have a challenge with wastewater, which is the water that runs off after heavy rainstorms, and it's all in all of the tropical environments, the heavy rainstorms that get, and they run off excess fertilizing of agricultural products. It adds nitrogen and phosphorus to the soils, and it creates a remarkable amount of excess products that lead to algae, which is a bad thing to have because they lead to harmful algae. And the waste that come in, it's all the solid waste that we produce and all the liquid waste and all the recyclables that are non-recyclable products that go in. They separate the solid waste and they treat it, and then they bring it to the agricultural areas to fertilize, and it's a very complex project. So the idea for a city planner or an urban planner is to look at the city or village or town as an enterprise with a carbon footprint, with people in it that will have to be transported around. And to measure that and to use that as your basic, one of the basic platforms to design. The second one is water and water consumption, because that's a critical issue, both the quality of the water and how you use the water. One of the finest examples of a city going through renovation is in Hamburg, Germany, where they took an old part of the sea. Hamburg is located in an area that's very close to the North Sea, and there's a lot of shipping that comes in there. And they used to have these old warehouses, and they finally just shut all the warehouses down because they weren't really a good place. They weren't environmentally sound. Well, they took that area and they looked at it as a subdivision or a new village, and they said, we're going to do this by turn this into a model for other countries. And they built an environmentally sound village that would be for 2,000 or 3,000 people. And they did it by starting with, what's the carbon footprint? What are our wastes? What are our water demands? What are our energy demands? How will we provide the energy? And with energy, one of the unusual things, one of the largest consumers of water in the world is the energy sector for cooling, whether it's nuclear, carbon-based, whether it's fuel, its fuel is natural gas or its fuel is oil. It consumes a vast amount of water to keep the product, the generators cool. And in the case of nuclear, it's more than cooling. It's a critical issue to avoid a very dangerous situation. So I think for urban planners, urban planners may be the people of the future that help create the environments that we live in and prosper in. And they're going to have a very critical issue. So.
Yeah, I would just want to add to that very excellent outline that urban planners have a very big role to play to preserve the green lungs in our existing, hopefully still existing framework of our cities and to create the right balance between living space, recreational space, space that can produce the fresh air, that can absorb the carbon, infrastructure of public transport. This holistic planning is very, very important. But the problem is often that one thing what the urban planners actually put on in the plans, but whether politicians and local authorities and people who ultimately sign off on development plans follow exactly that. I know from my friend in Malaysia, her dad was an urban planner. He made a lot of wonderful plans, but a lot of these plans got thrown overboard out of the window because somebody was keen to make a lot of money from a nice piece of land. And then, if there is no strict enforcement, then very quickly something that's recreational space or park or even forest might turn into another concrete building. So enforcement of what urban planners have come up with is very, very critical as well to make this really sustainable.
Okay. So we got different insights on that, because there is always issues with urban planners, because they want to do something, actually that's a part of development, but still they need to care about the environment, because environment is really important. So having said that, there was another concept that was as our question. So it was about sustainable finance. So the question says, sustainable finance is one of the way to reach sustainability. So how can government use this initiative to reach sustainability? So the concept of sustainable finance. Yeah.
I think sustainable finance, there are many aspects to it.
Environmental business.
Yeah, sustainable finance, there are many different aspects to it. Sustainable finance might come from the market itself. There are more and more bonds that companies raise that are green bonds, sustainable bonds. There are investment funds that say we want to invest only in sustainable projects, sustainable innovations. There are ESG funds, environment, social governance funds, that are putting money into companies that have best practice in terms of environment, social, and governance issues. And these funds have actually been considered successful during the COVID crisis because their losses were less than the normal funds. It's usually seen as a proxy for good management and risk prevention. So ESG funds are becoming even more popular. There are funds from development banks like the Asian Development Bank in our part of the world, the African Development Bank. And these funds usually carry stipulations as well that the projects that are being executed by these funds at national levels have to have so-called environmental safeguards in place. The Asian Development Bank, for example, I used to be a consultant for the environmental safeguards team for a while. They have, for all these projects, these environmental safeguard reports, and they are trying to increasingly build in sustainable development. So now we have the COVID recovery plans that in a lot of countries, Korea, Europe, UK, Germany, make an official link to green recovery. So the governments are saying we need to put priority on sustainable funds. But then NGOs have criticized governments as well that why are you giving billions to the aviation sector? I mean, the aviation sector is one of the most hit sectors. It's not considered a sustainable industry, and governments are bailing them out. So this has been criticized by environmental NGOs as well. But sustainable finance is on the rise. It's having an increasing impact on governments, on projects, on business. That sustainability needs to be at the core of what they're doing to actually be able to be even eligible for these kind of funds. I'm sure Greg has got some additional points on that.
Yeah, you've made some great points on that, and the caution is always in fact, you described it beautifully earlier when you said sometimes politics get in the way, and the issue with sustainable finance is that there will be a wave of interest on a certain government administration, and then they begin to lose interest over time. So the key is to try to get sustainable finance to be committed on a long-term basis. And I think in the first session, Matthias mentioned ESG funds. When I wrote my book in 2011, ESG finance was around, globally invested, was less than 500 billion USD. Today, this is what 9 years later, it's approaching $30 trillion USD. So there's a massive amount of money being funneled into investment. Now, the government has to decide, let me do the right thing in these things. And the idea there are investments that are made up just of government sustainable bonds, like green bonds, which is what Matthias said. They go all the different countries and they find these bonds, and then they ask to be in a trust, and they invest in it. And so there's money available for it, but it requires, and in the United States, I think we have people that come to the United States to learn how to be crazy in government, and it requires the government to have a long-term view, and that's one of the hardest things that's difficult. But there is money available for this, and it makes me crazy to think that, we argue in the United States about the wrong issues, and the possibility of funding for any kind of green initiative is there. It just has to take the will. I call it political will, the will of the government to do it, that'll make it so.
Okay, so fair enough. So there was also, when we talk about reusing, recycling the products. So there was one query about this, use of some materials to create eco-friendly products. So there was one question which says, as we know, this third world countries like Bangladesh, India is dependent on garment and textile sectors as well as the sanitary sectors, and they produce a huge amount of harmful waste. And huge amount of research, different research is going through this, but there are only some few effective and working solutions to overcome this situation. So how can what are the steps that can influence the eco-friendly steps in order to, prevent this harmful waste? When we talk about garment and textile sectors. So that is the question, sir.
Just visit a company called Plummy Fashion in Bangladesh. I saw it with my own eyes. It is the garment factory that has, at the time when it was certified to LEED Platinum, the highest LEED score anywhere in the world. At the end of their wastewater treatment process, you can drink the water. I think this may be the only garment factory in the world where you can drink the water at the end. This is in Bangladesh. So it is possible. I've seen it with my own eyes. I was there. They even manufacture a lot of their products from organic cotton and eco-friendly raw materials. So this is for me the example that it is possible. And the owner of that factory has attracted a lot of business from Germany, from Europe, because of the fact that he is clean, he is eco-friendly, he treats his workers in a socially responsible manner. So this is an example that it can be done. but there are hundreds, thousands of factories that are not practicing this. How can we clean that part up? This is a very difficult question. It must come with a consumer demand. It's very difficult for us to find out where our products are coming from and where have they been manufactured. But for those big chains, for those big fashion labels, they should have a diligence in their supply chain to evaluate their suppliers from those perspectives. If it comes from the market itself, then it will be effective. Government can do things to enforce it as well, and government should enforce this, especially the wastewater treatment, because the more toxic pollution gets emitted into the water streams and into the air, the more it will cost the country in cleanup costs and in public health costs, because it will damage the environment, it will create a long-term liability, and it will have a huge negative impact on people's health.
So they also talked, the question was also relevant to it is hard to invest in mass scale projects in this sector because of cost ineffectiveness for Bangladesh. So how can this problem be mitigated? So they say that the price, due to price rise, it's very difficult to invest in mass scale projects. And in this way, how can we take the step to work for different projects related to environment? How can we make the government trust us, because whatever project we are doing it for good, and that will be good for our environment. So that was also one of the questions. So how do we
really
convince
understand
the stakeholders?
I don't really understand the question. Exactly. That is the challenge I have. But if your interpretation of the question at the end, how can we make government trust us? Be sure that just because you're doing something that is eco-friendly is not a guarantee that you will succeed and that you have buyers. You need to have commercially competitive solution if you think about products. I experienced that with a business I started in Germany. We have eco-friendly building material. We replaced the cement with blast furnace slag, a byproduct from steel making. Our sales have been growing nicely, not because we are a much greener, lower carbon footprint product, but because we have superior product performance. Our floor is actually more chemically and abrasion resistant than a cement-based floor. Our floor is easier to apply than epoxy, because epoxy, if anything is slightly damp or wet, it will peel off. Our floor does not peel off, even if you apply it in a damp surface. So these are the main reasons why we are growing, why we are selling, not actually the environmental reasons. Unless you are in a market where people will buy based on environmental criteria, or let's say in food, there is a certain market segment in the food where people will buy and happily pay a lot more for organic food because they want to protect their health. But these are niche markets in developing countries. These are strong markets in developed countries, and the prices have become very much aligned. But in Philippines, in Bangladesh, in Nepal, usually the organic food products are much more expensive. Hence, you have only a small niche population that can afford them. So you need to take all these issues into consideration. But if I could further understand the question, but maybe Greg understands it more than I do.
No, I'm not sure if it means, do they have projects that they want the government to invest in, or are they talking about money that they would like to invest in, but it's too high a price? That's what I'm not sure.
So I think he meant to say, even if we have some projects that is related to environmental business, so there might be certain things that they need to government understand that they get the help, or something like that. Yes.
Well, I couldn't say it any better than Matthias. I think it required, the response to the needs of the community In other words, what projects does my community need in Bangladesh? The government must say, this is what we need to do. In Panama, when Panama decided to expand the Panama Canal, it was a massive undertaking to expand it. And they looked at the entire system and they said we had to change the harbor because we'd have more ships. And then there would be more money coming in. So we need to encourage the banking industry. It was the government who started to set a strategic plan to change the community of Panama City, the capital of Panama. So in Bangladesh, it will have to be the same thing. Otherwise, you will have a project and you say, I have a solution. And they say, that's not the solution we want. We have this problem that we want to work on. So I think first is to find out what are the available, what are the demands? What does the government want? Now, it may not be the right thing, but that's the problem with governments. They kind of choose what's politically correct or what's correct for the time. So it's not just the fact that you have a solution that's a green solution. It may be an extraordinary project, a remarkable project. But if the government sees no way to invest in it, then you're going to have to look for outside funding from a different marketplace or from, like we talked about, ESG funding or some other way of getting funding in. But it starts, unfortunately, with the government community if you're going to talk about government investment. So like a green bond would not be issued for general activities. A green bond is usually issued for a specific long-term project to get the investments for the large project. And that's what that green bond is for. Having another project besides that and asking the government to adopt it or to pay for it would be probably unsuccessful. So I don't know if I've added, again, it's a little hard to figure out how to respond to the question, but so I hope that helped.
Yeah, surely, sir. So we have a question in comment box. It states, it's from Philippines. I think the one who commented is from Philippines. So he writes, our country, Philippines, has various policies on solid waste management. One of these is the Republic Act number 903 on ethical waste management. My question is, why is it that despite of this law, waste problems remain the major daunting challenge among local government units? So that's the question, sir, for GreenMan.
Yeah. One question would be in the context of this, if so few are actually complying and implementing the law, is the law realistic from an operational point of view? That's one question. Second point is, there's obviously a lack of enforcement. There is a law, but very few places actually comply with the law. And this is a big issue here in the Philippines. There are many great laws, but the enforcement of existing laws is very shaky. So you have all these local authorities who are not complying with the law, but nobody is telling them to change. Or somebody is telling them to change on paper. But in real life, there is no proper enforcement mechanism like fine or some other mechanism. The guys who are in charge and don't do it, they don't have to face any consequences. So in theory, this Republic Waste Act in the Philippines looks very nice on paper, but in practice, very, very few places are actually doing it. So it's either too complicated, too expensive, or people are not willing to do it because there is no enforcement. So this is one observation here in the Philippines. Some places who do it have come up with great ways of recycling, upcycling, and separating. I remember from looking at the questions last time, there were a lot of questions about waste and about plastic waste. What I did in my condominium in Kuala Lumpur more than 10 years ago with my neighbor Gregors, we found out that the cleaners are already recycling. Why? Because they want to make some extra money. This is the main driver in developing countries. The informal waste collectors who are selling it to the recycling companies. And if we can help them to do more, that's what we do at home here in the Philippines. We separate our waste and we give it to these informal recyclers who don't earn much anyway, and they are super happy when they get a whole bag from me. You know, you should see some of their faces, like it's Hari Raya and Christmas and all the religious celebrations in one together. That's how they are smiling. So it's basically makes people very happy. And when we implemented that in my condo, the cleaners were the winners, because from previously 100 kilos of recyclables that they could sell, we then were able to ramp it up to more than 300 kilos. So when we think about waste, what are the simple solutions? If you go online and you Google open source plastic waste, you find a lot of systems that describe in detail how you can become an entrepreneur making products from plastic waste. These are open source systems. They cost very little. You get even instructions how you can raise the funds on the internet to set up such a business. I think it's Precious Plastic Project or something like that. So there's a lot of opportunity in waste, but you need to tailor it to your local circumstances and look at where you can get the waste from. But there are endless opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have another question. So another question is really interesting, actually. So it states, how the solid waste affecting our behavior and ethics? Please enlighten.
It's a great question. And actually, you could have a program for 2 hours long and never get to the bottom of this one. I think ethics, ethical behavior is of people in general. And I think the question really goes to how can we encourage ourselves and others to think about the ethical decisions around waste. When Matthias was talking about that company, I know who that company is, but I won't say it either. This idea that that globally we're in a consumable planet. We love things. We love to buy things. Believe it or not, there's just under 1 billion people on the planet that don't have access to clean drinking water or waste processing. And yet the average number of cell phones per person, there's three, well, this was when I wrote the book, there were 3 times as many phones out as there were people on the planet. And they expected it to reach a similar level by 2020, for smartphones. And I have a smartphone that's 4 generations old and still works. It's harder to see because it's small, but I get all the apps that the other phone has, the latest phones have. And I think of it in a different way. But it's the consumable passion I need to get more things in our lives. And in some cases, they're the basic things like food, water, clothing, and a house, a place to live. But too often, as prosperity grows, there's a demand for more things. My phone is too old. This phone is way too old. It was manufactured too long ago. And the mass market media that comes out, even on Facebook, happened to like one time a shirt that I saw in there. Now every day I have to eliminate that because I'm getting advertisements to buy shirts like this, and it's a consumable nature, and it is the single most ethical problem that we have, is the need for more. And it's a personal value. Someone like Matthias is unique. He's not a person of more. He's a person of what do I need less of so I can get by. And that's a very unique individual. And I think the ethical behavior that we have, the decision, do I really need more? There's a clothing manufacturer that makes Patagonia, which is a privately owned company. They're one of the leaders in sustainable garment manufacturing in the world. And one of the ideas they had, their products are so good, they don't think you need to buy a new jacket every year. And that's what they advertise. And they try, whenever their new product comes out, a new jacket, they'll have an advertisement that says, if you've bought a jacket in the last 3 years, you don't need this jacket. Something like that. So it takes more than just the individuals, but I think the individuals have to lead the way in ethical decisions about waste. And I'm sorry if I spent too much time on the ethics, but I really think that's the problem. The tail end of it, what do we do with all this waste, is a decision that comes only when we haven't considered the first decision, which was, do I need it? We're always at the tail end, the end of its life cycle. That's why I said when the smart companies are beginning to think cradle to grave, the beginning of the product chain, all the way through its recycling and end of life, that's the responsibility of a company, not the middle part where they manufacture it, but the responsibility of a company is from the beginning to the end. They are responsible, and so are we as the consumer. So.
Spot on, Greg. And let me add one point. I totally agree with you. The ethical question, what do we really need? And then the question of happiness. What gives us happiness? The marketing industry tries to tell us that the new gadget makes us happy. You see it all over Facebook. People make videos of unpacking the new things they get. They show the phone that they got from their boyfriend. Oh, look how sweet is my boyfriend. All of that doesn't last very long. Consumables don't last. Experiences that are not waste, that have no carbon footprint. Connection, human connection, you being out there hugging a tree, that is much more happiness. Your family, the people that you love, that is the essence of life, not the gadgets that we have been infiltrated, that we need them. Stop that manipulation by switching over to really establishing what is the most important thing in your life. It's not the gadget that you have. Otherwise, you'll never be a happy person.
Yeah. That's such a great comment about happiness. There's been studies done in different parts of the world on happiness. And it goes to the issue of what makes people happy. I know we don't have time to go down that, but that's a brilliant statement about self-satisfaction. I am at ease and happy with the decision I made. So I'm sorry. Saru, back to you. I'm sorry.
Okay. So we are almost at the end of today's session, but still we have a question. So the question is on the screen. It states, which type of green business can entrepreneurs start? Can you give an example? And how much initial money is required to start that business? I think this question was already covered earlier, but still, if you have to give example to our viewers, yes.
Example, my first green business, the consulting and training business, we had no capital to start it. We didn't take a salary for the first 3 months. until we had our first project to pay ourselves a salary. We used our notebooks, and that was all we had. And 2 years later, we sold it to a listed engineering company, and we both made very, very good money. We're selling it to that listed engineering company. The other business I started, the green building materials business, that required 3 million euro. 3 million euro to start, because we needed cash flow, we needed equipment. The question is, what is the right thing for you? I cannot answer it. You need to spend a couple of weeks' time to search the market, to search your skills, to identify the Bangladeshi market, the global market. You can start being an eco-entrepreneur by becoming a consultant through Upwork, through Fiverr, through other platforms here and now. And for that, you don't need any capital. But if you want to move into eco-friendly materials, organic products, other concepts, green investments, there are 1,001 different business opportunities. It's very difficult to give you a generic instruction. You need to do this. You can start 10 different businesses on waste. You know, the plastic upcycling, the electronic product recovery, the turning plastic into biofuels. Every country has a plastic product. Google plastic to fuels, not biofuels, but diesel and other fuels. This is all possible. There are even, videos, instructional videos on YouTube how you can do it. So there are limitless possibilities. Select the thing that is right for your skill, for your market, and for your budget.
Yeah, I would. One of the things I would also suggest, just an extension of what Matthias just said. I think one of the real powerful tools that companies are working on now is the supply chain, understanding how to map a supply chain and then rate it according to its carbon footprint, the amount of water consumed, its social responsibility. So, that doesn't require a master's degree at a university. It requires study. And I think what Matthias said is so true. Understand your market needs and learn, keep learning. And then someday you'll say, oh my God, there's a business I can get involved in. If I go back to when I was a very young man in college, they had electricity during that time, even though I'm very old. I was an engineer by degree, and I believed I was going to be an engineer. And then for the rest of my life, I would work in manufacturing, and that didn't last. I worked in environment for 8 years and then began to take a different course and have stayed in this field for many, many decades. But at the time, I didn't believe that was going to be the case when I graduated from college. But as time went on and I kept looking at what I had in front of me and what was in the world, I started making decisions and using my college degree as a tool to go into a new business. And some of them didn't take much at all, and others did take a lot of money. And I made a lot of mistakes along the way. But even with mistakes, the worst that can happen is that it was a mistake and you have to just don't do it a second time and try something new. Yeah. So like Matthias said, study the market, think about what their needs are, what the market needs, and start to serve that rather than just what you believe is the right thing. Try to understand the community and how you can adapt and use your values and your tools to solve those problems.
And adding to that, Greg, one very important point that you just made, I know we're going to finish soon, but let me just add this point. You didn't have an environmental degree, but as an engineer, you can move into a lot of different environmental fields. Even a doctor now, who, is tired of maybe dealing directly with patients could become an expert for environmental management for hospitals. Or even now, during the COVID crisis, all the hospitals are struggling. What are the antivirus measures? What technology is out there to clean up the air, to keep the air quality optimized? I've had a couple of discussions of that recently. Did you know that when you have a humidity between 40 and 60%, a certain temperature setting and minimum PM 2.5, these are the small particles of pollution that we often have in the air, that is the fastest way of deactivating viruses in your building. There are other technologies out there. So you might not be an environmental scientist like I am. You might be a doctor, a dentist, an engineer, an accountant, whatever. But you can move into the environmental field by developing your specific niche, either as an individual consultant, as a trainer, as a advisor, or you can start your business where you employ other people around that. There are so many possibilities. You just need to explore the path. And sometimes the least risky way is to start as a online consultant through those outsourcing platforms to offer your expertise, or as a volunteer to gain the experience to explore this market niche. So huge opportunities now, especially in a crisis. There are always opportunities for new jobs and businesses.
Very well done.
Yeah. So rightfully said. Yeah, that was very interesting thing to hear. And I think we covered the suggestion to our viewers as well from Greg and GreenMan. So whatever we do, we should do it with great enthusiasm. And this capital is not a problem if you have that urge to do something for the environment and also for your country. So thank you so much. It was such a wonderful discussion with Mr. GreenMan and Greg. I think this should be Green Hour with Mr. GreenMan and Greg. It was very interesting. Thank you so much, sir. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Great to see you guys. Thank you to everybody out there. Bye-bye. Thanks, Greg.
To all our viewers, thank you so much for being here with us. And also, I would like to inform you all, we'll be back with another new energizing episode of Green Hour with GreenMan next month. So till then, stay tuned and also follow Eco Network, because we will bring various programs to you. We'll bring various insightful discussion, and also, as you know, GreenMan is our advisor. Yeah, we'll be working closely with him. And if you have any queries, feel free to reach us, and we'll definitely connect you with GreenMan. So let's do it, because making green and having a green environment is everything in this present context. So thank you so much, GreenMan. Thank you so much, Greg, sir, for your time. And that was very interesting. So thank you, and see you in the next episode, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Saru. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Matthias. Thank you, Saru.
Thank you. Bye.